Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Foi Pro Espaço. I'm Giovanna, your host. Today's episode is truly special. I have the pleasure of welcoming someone who has deeply inspired my journey, Mr. Mike Lester. Mike spent over 12 years at NASA working in the incredible tech transfer and commercialization division. That's the department where they are responsible for turning space technology into real-world solutions here on Earth. He is now the founder of KSCAA International Space Academy, a unique school focused on bringing space education to students around the globe. And today, we are going to talk about the journey, the importance of education, and how space innovation impacts our lives more than we can imagine. Mike, it's an honor to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So, Mike,
Good to be here.
could you please briefly introduce yourself and explain your journey into NASA and technology transfer?
Okay. Well, as Giovanna said, I'm a retired NASA engineer. I was with NASA for about 12 years before I retired. But before that, I was a United States Air Force officer. I was involved with military space program for quite a long time. So I have quite a long background actually in space, both military and then with NASA. Um, I spent the majority of my time at NASA involved in a program that is not widely known by most people, even most people in the United States, like many of the other NASA programs, but it's probably one of the most important programs that we have. And it was one of the most interesting programs for me personally, and one of the most fulfilling programs to have the opportunity to work on. And Giovanna has been nice enough to ask me to uh, join today to talk a little bit about that program. I came to that program after being involved with the shuttle program, for those of you who may remember that. And then I did strategic communications at NASA and a lot of different high level strategic positions. I discovered technology transfer in the spinoff program through a friend, ended up joining the program and staying with them until I retired.
Perfect. And Mike, as technology transfer partnership manager, what exactly were your main responsibilities like in the day life?
I was at the Kennedy Space Center. If you're
Okay.
familiar, NASA has a number of space centers throughout the United States, and each one of them has their own technology transfer manager. So my focus was on commercializing the technologies and the research that was done at Kennedy Space Center by the researchers there. And we did quite a bit of research there. We had very many well-known and even world-renowned scientists that work there. Many of them have many patents and many inventions. And we found over the years at NASA that some of our technology breakthroughs that we were developing for space and some of our innovations for space turned out to have uses here on Earth in terrestrial applications. And sometimes our technologies were better than anything that had been developed here on Earth and could solve problems that current technologies could not solve or were just not as good. And we could develop advancements using these space technologies if they could be repurposed and transformed to a degree to fit the terrestrial application. Because you have to remember, these are developed for space applications, not for the Earth. So there's some modification that has to go on there. So NASA had really discovered that since its founding back in the 50s and has been offering these innovations to commercial companies and university researchers for further research and development, commercial private companies for further development for things here on Earth, entrepreneurs who want to develop things, and has been spinning these things off to the private sector for a long time. And it turned out to be a gold mine for many entrepreneurs and many business people who knew that these innovations were out there and knew that they could get access to them and beat their competition by bringing better technologies into the marketplace that were disruptive based on these NASA innovations. which they did not always publicly disclose. That was not always publicly known that they were working off NASA innovations. It took NASA to get out and brag about this and try to tell everybody
Talk about it.
about this value, because commercial companies kind of want you to believe, hey, this is all me. These are all my ideas. They don't.
Yeah.
There's some NASA researcher that cracked the code, if you will, as they like to say, on that particular innovation. So, but we've been spinning these things off, and we have contributed significantly to the American economy. It's in the billions of dollars, the economic benefit and the jobs that have been created and companies built around NASA technologies.
And can you share a specific NASA technology that was successfully adapted to solve a problem here on Earth?
Well, I get asked that question a lot. I always like to answer it this way. We guessed that we have probably spun off well over 2,000 technologies in the commercial sector. And some have had wide impact, some less impact, and everywhere in the middle. So I said, all right, well, let me spin the dial and pick one of the 2,000. Because I like a lot of them, right? I like them. Let's spin one, see where it ends up, just say, okay, that's the one we're going to talk about.
Okay.
No, of course we can't do that because I don't have them all memorized. So I'm just going to talk about my personal favorite.
Okay.
And maybe two favorites, if I can talk about two favorites.
Yeah, please.
So one of my personal favorites is the CMOS sensor. So a CMOS sensor. That is actually a technical name for the sensor that is in digital cameras and the sensors that are now in the digital camera in your smartphone.
Like in our...
That's right. That's called a CMOS sensor, or at one point in its early stages, it was called a CMOS sensor. And NASA did some of the very first development of these tiny little sensors that could take very high resolution pictures beyond anything, decades ago, beyond anything that was there. Because back in the day when I was young, we had cameras. We didn't have digital cameras. And then when we got digital cameras, they were these big, huge things because the sensors had to be big, had to be really big to take a good picture. So we really pioneered shrinking the sensor for our space research and still taking very good high resolution pictures. Well, that got spun off to the private sector. Entrepreneurs and commercial folks said, hey, I think I can do something with that little itty bitty sensor. And I can build small little cameras that will take good pictures. And I think people will want these cameras. And we can shrink the size of digital cameras. Well, then they figured out when we started coming out with smartphones instead of flip phones, that we could put a camera in a cell phone with a tiny little sensor that could take a pretty good picture. Now, they weren't great in the beginning. Smartphones weren't great. But those started being incorporated into the smartphones where now you had a camera. You didn't need this big, bulky digital camera. And now that you took your cell phone everywhere, you now had a camera with you everywhere. You could go and you could photograph every aspect of your life, Yeah. And personally, I believe that helped drive the popularity of smartphones. Because think about it. If you couldn't take photographs with your smartphone, would that be as cool? Probably not. Or as even valuable or as functional. And would you always want the latest and greatest one because you really want the better camera? Right? At least my daughters. My daughters had to have the latest and greatest one every time because they kept coming out with a better camera.
Yeah.
So and that's why we're constantly buying new cell phones, right?
Yeah.
Buying upgrades. Because we wanted that new camera, not because we really needed a better cell phone than what we already had, smartphone. So I really do believe it drove a lot of the consumer market in developing these cameras. And those sensors trace their technological roots back to the space program. Sure. And so that's one of my favorite ones because it's just in everybody's life. And you don't even know it. You take it for granted.
Yeah, and there's a whole industry around it because now we have like Instagram and Facebook and their social media that just use this indirectly. Like they need those cameras because if those cameras didn't exist, we wouldn't have those social medias and etc.
Right, YouTube. I mean, all this stuff is camera-based video. and so half the social media wouldn't even exist without these cameras.
Yeah.
So you could argue, that the camera now has drove the social media market, and that traces back. So even NASA can take credit for the social media explosion.
Yeah.
TikTok. I don't know if that's a good thing. That may not be a good thing.
Yeah. Who knows? So, but Mike, NASA holds thousands of patents. So how do companies get access to them, like in the daily basis?
Well, how they find out about them is a whole variety of ways, and we won't go into all those different ways, but those that are looking know where to find these patents, because patents are all published ultimately by the United States government on a public website. Every patent in the United States is published. That's the purpose for getting a patent, so that your technology is published in the public domain and everybody can see it and find out about it. But NASA has other means of trying to communicate with the private sector on here's our particular patents and here's what's available. Now, from a legal perspective, obviously, since there's a patent, that gives NASA, the inventor, a certain amount of protection. You can't just legally study my patent, my secret syrup, my secret sauce, my secret cool technology, which is not secret because now it's published, because it's patented. And you can't just go off and recreate it and sell and make money and benefit without my approval, the inventor, the patent holder. That's what the patent law provides. So you have to have my approval and my agreement, and usually you have to pay me money for me to get my agreement.
Yeah.
And that leads to, well, what is that legal agreement? That legal agreement in the United States is called a license agreement that we enter into that allows you to go off and do something with my patent, whatever you want to do. And then you give me whatever compensation we've agreed to, if any. If I want, whatever we've agreed to, you have to give me compensation. But that ensures that you have the legal right to do what you're doing, and I can't sue you and shut you down for violating my patent. So that's how they get legal rights, through license agreements.
What were some challenges in helping these technologies reach the private sector? So did you face any challenging while you were working there?
Well, we faced many hurdles. I think the biggest hurdle that I found in my tenure there is most of the private sector and commercial companies do not know we have these patented technologies. They don't know. So first of all, you have to find a way to inform them. And yes, we publish electronic magazines, and we have websites, and we have a searchable database of all our patents that's out on the NASA Technology Transfer Program website, which anybody can Google and find all these things. These resources where you can easily search and find all our patents and easily contact us. We tried to make it easy for them to find it, contact us, and start a discussion over it. But what I spent the majority of my time doing was traveling throughout Florida, primarily communicating with the business community. Any opportunity I can get in front of a group of business people, especially tech development, then I was out there trying to get out there and give a presentation to inform people about the tech transfer program at NASA and all these NASA patents, and that they could get access to some of these that had commercial potential. And that's what a patent means. NASA does not get a patent unless we see commercial potential. So the very fact that we have a patent on it is telling you there's some potential for this use here on Earth other than in space applications, as determined by NASA itself. So that should get your attention. Looking at these patented technologies should get your attention, and they're worth looking at. And so I became what my tech transfer friends used to call the evangelist for NASA tech transfer. Mike became known in Florida as the evangelist of NASA tech transfer because I traveled all over the place and showed up all over the place communicating, just constantly communicating about that. I even went overseas a little bit and communicated, said, if you come back and start an American company, if you're a Brazilian entrepreneur and you want to start an American company, you can do that. And with an American company, you can access NASA technology. You can't
And
with a foreign company. A foreign company can't, but
uh-huh.
so
And
I
you've
would
been
even
to
talk to
Brazil.
foreign audiences too.
Oh, nice. And you've been to Brazil too, right?
Oh yeah, I did. But one other last thing about when you talk about the obstacles, I think the other major obstacle for us is, and there's really not a lot you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
The other major obstacle that I saw was when we develop something for space, we do very early stage development. We do early stage research. We're developing things from scratch. We call
Okay.
it technology readiness level, which measures from 0, which means you got an idea, to 10, which means it's fully operational. So we're starting with ideas and developing things to TRL1, TRL2, very early stage research and early stage technology development for space. Once we determine we think there's some commercial potential there and we patent it and we make it known to the business sector, the businessman comes in and looks at that and says, all right, I'm concerned that I, the business, am going to have 10 more years of technology, risk, and cost before I can bring that into a commercial product that I can sell for a terrestrial application. Right? NASA, you may continue developing this for space, and that's fine, but you're going in a different direction. You're developing something for minus 300 degrees below Fahrenheit, below 0, ultra radiation. I don't have any of those issues. That's not the environment on Earth. I've got a different use for this and a different environment, and I've got to go in a very different direction. And I've got a lot of testing, a lot of development, and that's risk and cost. And I had the top R&D guy at a major corporation that was sitting with me talking about this. I'm basically repeating what he told me. And he said, the biggest barrier, he said, I can't come in and get you and license your technologies because I got to have something to market in 2 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Out of my lab, out of my testing facility, and into market 2 to 3 years. I can't come in with this early stage stuff and I need 8, 9, 10 years, right? Management's just not going to support the investment.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, this stuff is great, but you're not developing it far enough for me to come in and gobble up these technologies. And we said, well, but we can't do that. We don't have the budget. And again, the terrestrial application oftentimes is very different than the space. And if we are going to have funding, it's going to be for space, not for terrestrial. That was a very frustrating barrier. And so after that conversation, I went back to my team and I said, who develops technologies early stage? Who does early research, breakthrough research here on Earth for Earth applications? Universities, university researchers. And they spin their stuff, they patent their stuff and license their stuff out all the time. Big universities do this all the time. And I said, we have got to come up with a way to get university researchers working with our early stage technologies and further developing them. If they can get the funding, we're not going to pay them. This program can't pay them to do that. But if they can get their own funding, we can give them the legal right to take this technology further toward the commercial market. Right? And then the university researcher can get a joint patent with NASA, have their own developments, their own patents, their own breakthroughs that they want to spin off because they want the royalty money.
Yeah.
Right. You've got university researchers that have become wealthy off development of technologies. So I said the university guys know the commercial applications. They have an incentive to develop these things. They can get their own funding to take these technologies further. And then the corporation will come in and license it potentially from the university. And that would be a great partnership collaboration idea. Problem, no university is going to come in and sign a license agreement that's 20 pages long, takes at least 6 months to put it in place, tons of legal review by their lawyers, all kinds of long-term commitments to NASA, which could include royalty payments.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to do that. Those are commercial license agreements. They're not going to do that. Thus, we came up with something called the evaluation license. The evaluation license is a streamlined, very simple license agreement with no commitment to NASA. You don't provide anything. You're not commercializing. You're just further developing the technology. In other words, you are evaluating the technology, testing, developing. You're probably still working in a laboratory environment, maybe building early stage prototypes. So you're developing it under a license agreement called the evaluation license agreement, which would be very, very simple, very streamlined, no commitments to NASA, and no cost to a university. No cost, free. We don't even need a processing fee. We don't even have, a processing fee like we do with commercial licenses. Those are costly licenses to companies. So we got to make these free. And then if we can help the NASA researchers find a funding source, or not the NASA researchers, but the university researcher find funding, we think many of our local universities throughout Florida will grab a hold of these, especially University of Central Florida, University of Florida, where they have big engineering departments and a lot of labs and a lot of great professors doing really good, tech development work and master's students, things like that. And we ended up developing a relationship with an organization called Space Grant, who was granted money from NASA to do educational things with the money, with universities, and University of Central Florida, where their universities would bid on some of our early stage patented technologies, would propose, and we would help evaluate and decide and give them this license to move this technology forward. And the NASA Space Grant would pay them the money they needed to do the research. We created that from nothing. My team and I at Kennedy Space Center, that idea. And that was slowly but surely adopted by every tech transfer office in NASA, all the other space centers, and made our program manager in DC one of my best buddies for ideas like that, just ideas like that. So we lay claim to that interesting idea, but it was an attempt to overcome that barrier, get these technologies further developed by somebody using somebody's money, so corporations would grab a hold of these. And every year since I've been gone, I just checked in not long ago, they still are doing that activity. Even 5 years after I retired, a lot of these things go away after you leave, but they're still doing it. They're still working with Space Grant, and they're still working with the University of Central Florida, primarily university researchers there. And every year they get proposals on some of our patented technologies from some of the professors who are working on them.
That's amazing, because the collaboration with universities is something like, as you said, it's gold.
And it was such a weird relationship because, here we are, universities working with tech transfer just didn't happen very often. They work with our researchers, but not with tech transfer. We were used to working with private companies. But the collaboration between Space Grant and who had never done anything like this before, never funded something like this before, which they said they really liked. Every time they would propose for their grant, they would win. And they said because they always had this in as one of their initiatives, and it helped them continue to win money from NASA to do something like this. So it was a strange collaboration, but it was effective.
And talking about that, if students from United States, they want to work with NASA in that tech and transfer sector, what they need to have, what skills they need to have?
If you wanted to work at NASA in technology transfer, you would be most competitive with, well, believe it or not, a law degree in patented law, in the laws of patenting and the laws of licensing, because that is highly legalistic and a very complex field. And we spend a lot of time and energy just trying to get things patented through the U.S. Patent Office, and it requires lots of lawyers, legal backgrounds. So a legal background in that area, wow, that is that's going to get everybody's attention. And if you're trying to compete for a job at NASA in tech transfer, you're going to be more competitive. The second skill, which is always fantastic, is have you done research and technology development yourself?
Mm.
Do you have a PhD and you've been a university professor? You've done university research, or at least as a master's student, but you've done research and development. You're used to working in labs. You may have developed your own technologies and even have your own private patents. But do you understand research and development? Do you know how to do research? So that if you're in technology transfer, you know how to talk to the researchers, and you understand their issues, you understand their challenges, you understand about early stage development, you understand what it's like to get their research patented and how important that is to them, and then getting it licensed and those things. You understand from the researcher's perspective, because technology transfer is a trifecta of three things: the law, patented law, research, and then understanding entrepreneurialism, understanding privatization, commercialization. How do I take a technology and get it into a product that I can actually sell? Those three things all come together at one point. And the more versed you are in any of those three areas would make you more competitive.
And Mike, you worked in the U.S. Air Force. And how did it prepare you for working with innovation at NASA?
Well, the real answer is it didn't. I didn't do that. I mean, I did early stage research and development, but the military space programs, I was not involved in innovation or technology development or any kind of tech transfer for the Air Force. I was involved in other aspects of military space that eventually I applied for a job at NASA that was not in tech transfer. It was actually within the shuttle program, and it made me well qualified to go into the shuttle program. But I got into the shuttle program near the last 2 or 3 years before it was retired. I was at the end. And so that ended, soon after I got to NASA. We all had to transfer to other jobs and other programs because shuttle ended. And as I said, I did a bunch of different things on different programs, and eventually got the opportunity to go work in the tech transfer office simply because they needed somebody for a while. And they were looking for somebody with more of I had a very broad strategic planning background in space at that point, best way to describe it. A lot of soft skills rather than hard skills. And tech transfer and the lead at the time was really looking for somebody like that, and to really invigorate his program and come up with ideas like, how can we work with universities more? And we came up with a number of other initiatives and ideas as well when I was there in tech transfer. But that's what he was looking for, that kind of thinking, right? That kind of input, because he wasn't getting that a lot from his team. They were older folks who've been doing this forever, and nobody had a new idea. And a friend of mine introduced me to him and said, Mike is looking for a new program to leave shuttle. He's looking for a place to go within NASA at Kennedy Space Center. And talked, and I met with the lead, and he said, hey, why don't you just come over for a year and work with us and see if you like it. See if we like you, you like us, and you want to stay with our program. And I did. I loved it. It was fantastic. It was a fascinating program. I didn't even know it existed. I said, what's tech transfer? What's tech transfer? What? Patents, licenses? I didn't know we did this, spinoffs. And I worked at NASA. I didn't even know we had this program.
That's crazy.
So I jumped on board and stayed, and he retired, and then I retired. I retired like a month after he retired. When my boss retired, I said, I'm done.
I'm done. I'm
done.
Going. Perfect. So years later, you created a space education school, like KSA, International Space Academy. What made you decide to take that decision? What made you decide to create something like that?
Well, while I was still working for NASA with tech transfer, I met Jefferson Michaelis, and at the time he was the director of the Brazil Florida Chamber of Commerce. And he was not involved in education, I wasn't, but we just loved education. It was just something we both had a passion for. We became really good friends, got to know each other. He was trying to do some things in economic development, and we were mostly just friends and got to know each other personally. And he eventually invited me to Brazil as in my NASA capacity, to go down there and give some talks to Brazilian entrepreneurs who might want to establish companies in the United States, and then who might want to license some of our NASA technologies. And I even met with a Brazilian company down there that had done exactly that. They had a U.S. subsidiary in Chicago, and they were talking to us at Kennedy at the time about licensing one of our environmental remediation technologies, which I hope to be able to talk a little bit about, maybe at the end. They were interested in licensing one of these technologies, and we've been in conversations with them. And it was kind of neat to travel to Brazil and actually meet with the business owner, who started the company in Brazil and was doing environmental remediation in Brazil, established his U.S. company, and now was accessing our patents in environmental remediation from Kennedy. And so I got to meet with him and talk more about, how things were going, looking at our technologies. And it was just a great trip. But one of the things that we did is we also visited some public schools. Okay. And Jeff arranged for me and he to get up and talk to the kids and give talks to the kids and just try to motivate the kids about studying STEM, studying their science, the math, the things that are hard, things that a lot of kids don't really like in school, especially math. But if you do that, you can become the next generation of scientists, the next generation of engineers, developing and pioneering new technologies for space, for here on Earth. The next high-tech entrepreneur, the next Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, the next this guy, the next that, whatever, Google, the next founder of Google, of a Google type high-tech thing, Sergey. So you can do that if you'll study your science and your math and go on to college, if you can do that. And we just came back to that. Really, I think it changed us quite a bit. We said, how can we continue to find ways to inspire young people everywhere, but especially in Brazil? Jeff, being a Brazilian American, felt very passionate about trying to give back to Brazil and to Brazilian kids, which I felt passionate. I felt passionate about all kids, American kids, all kids everywhere. That was a special thing, I think, for him. He really wanted to do something for the Brazilian children. And we said, but we can't keep traveling to Brazil, and we can't get other NASA people to come. And we've got all these wonderful people and companies up here around Kennedy Space Center, which is, the heart of the U.S. space program. And we've developed a very dense population of space professionals in this area, doing all kinds of things in space. And NASA people, but we're all here. We're all over at Kennedy Space Center in that area. That's where we live. And we really can't bring all these people to Brazil because it's just not cost effective. You can't do that. But what if we could create some type of organization, education organization, in the Kennedy Space Center area, which we call the Space Coast, in that area, where we could bring Brazilian kids for an educational program, bring them here. However you came up with the funding, parents paying for them to come, other funding sources through scholarship type things and tuition assistance, but probably primarily parent funded, to bring the kids up here. And albeit, of course, that would not be inexpensive, that would not be cheap, with airfare and food, hotel, logistics, lodging, keep everybody safe, worry about hurricanes. We came up with all the barriers and said, we said, but what if we did? And what kind of education program would we create? And he and I were big believers in hands-on education, workshop, hands-on, experiential education, which we refer to as project-based learning. Project-based learning, where the child, instead of traditional educational tuition, is, an instructor talking, blah, 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 writing on a board.
Yeah.
You're taking notes, high school level. You're then reading a book, doing homework, and taking a test. We want to educate kids with doing hands-on projects, building, creating, programming, testing, doing things, and learning by project-based learning, which is also probably referred to more as vocational learning.
Okay.
So we didn't want to create some kind of traditional school where you come up and sit in class all day and we teach you about rocketry on a blackboard, right? The theory of rocketry. You can go to regular schools for all that. We want to bring the kids, we want to learn about space. We want to learn about space exploration. We want to do it with projects, hands-on projects in this community or in that community there. And we obviously can't keep the kids here for weeks and weeks and weeks. We decided the right time was really about a week. Very fast-paced, all day for 5 days, drink out of the fire hose, project-based learning, immersed in space exploration, learning about space exploration, and learning about NASA at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, which is a phenomenal place to learn, but certainly not the only thing you want to be doing. We want them in our classroom doing our workshops, and we created workshops that would teach space, but hands-on workshops. And we also wanted them to be able to go to the visitor complex, learn about the history of space exploration at NASA, but also it was the opportunity for them to interface with the space professionals in the community. We would take them to companies, commercial space companies, if we could, to NASA contractors, anybody that would allow our kids to come visit who was involved with space. We wanted to go visit if we could. Blue Origin, SpaceX. We also wanted to invite space professionals from the local community, retired NASA folks, regular NASA people, but a lot of the engineers that were working in commercial space, which was growing at the time in our area. We wanted to invite those engineers and those people to come visit with our kids and just talk about their careers. This is what I do. I went to college, I studied my science, I studied my engineering, I studied my math. I got my engineering degree. I got my degree in physics. Wasn't easy, wasn't hard, wasn't always fun, but I got it. And look at the cool stuff that I get to do as a job in my career. And I get paid pretty darn well doing it. You can make a pretty darn good living doing this, right? So we felt that could be very inspirational to young people. Let's see somebody who's working, besides just Mike. Of course, I'm a NASA engineer too. So I would come in and talk about my career with our students. We planned on doing that. So that was our concept. That was our plan. That was our content. Also, we wanted to visit some of our local universities, have a visit and do hands-on workshops at universities, real in-depth. We felt we had the contacts to develop in-depth tours at universities where you were really doing some interesting stuff at some of our local universities that are doing a lot of high-tech work and engineering work because of the proximity to the space program. So we felt we had all that. We have all these resources. We have all this wonderful opportunity. We have astronauts running around, the place out there. You never know who you're going to bump into, say, hey, come over and do this. Space Museum. We said, we've got all these resources and we can bring the kids to these things and have that be part of our content, part of our week. And we were worried about having too much for them to do, in 1 week. But we really felt like being away from home 1 week was probably long enough. So we established the company, we founded the organization, we created everything and, developed our partnerships. And like all organizations, we had our ups and downs and growing pains. But now we've been around for 10 years.
10 years, that's a lot. And why is it so important to introduce young students to space science and innovation and STEM fields?
Well, the importance of STEM, you really can't understate the importance of STEM to the world and the Western world and anywhere. Science and technology, engineering, and all that is the way of the future, because human life is really being driven now by technology in a way that it's never has before in human history. Technology is having a major impact last 100 years or so. We are in what's called the fourth industrial revolution. Now, you may remember the first one from your history classes. Maybe you know the second one. I missed the third one. But according to those who know, we're in the fourth one. I can believe that. The advances in materials science are unbelievable. Robotics, AI, programming. We are in a new, quote unquote, industrial revolution, but it's high tech. It's not, gin mills and printing presses and Model T Ford cars like it was 100-some years ago. This is AI now. And the advances in medical science are pretty amazing, as well as the advances in space technology and space explorations. So we are in a fourth industrial revolution that is going to revolutionize the way we live again. But now it's technology driven, not manufacturing driven, and it is going to make some major changes in how we live, and has already done so. The internet. I mean, 100 years ago, you didn't have the internet. I mean, when I was young, we didn't have the internet, and you can't believe this. We didn't have email. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have any of this stuff.
It was so fast.
Now you can't figure out how could we live without the internet. When the internet goes down at home, everybody freaks out.
Yeah.
We can't function because the internet's down. Right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then I always would say, well, how did we function before? How did we live without copy machines and faxes? But now faxes, who uses a fax? But for a while there. So, and technology is moving so fast. I was just amazed at the last technology, faxes, and said, how did we live without faxes? And now it's like, what's a fax?
Yeah, what's a fax?
Only 20 years later, I'm not sure anybody knows what that was. So things are coming and going very, very quickly. They're revolutionizing the way we live, and then they're gone because they've been replaced by something else that's even more revolutionary.
Yeah.
So we're in a fourth industrial revolution. It's being driven by technology. Well, who are the people and what are the skills who are driving that revolution then? Scientists, engineers, mathematicians, technology developers, not accountants and lawyers and doctors. Not there's nothing wrong with those folks, and farmers. They're not driving this revolution. They're not driving things. It's the STEM people and with the STEM skills that are driving these things and are in the forefront of revolutionizing the way we live and impacting the way we live in ways we couldn't imagine a long time ago, even when I was a child. So if you want to be on the forefront of changing the world, changing the way we live, that's the best way to do it, is through STEM. And of course, we're going to have problems from these technologies. We've already had unforeseen problems, unplanned problems that always come from these things, unfortunately. And then we need more technology to fix the problem that the last technology created. That's usually a technologically driven solution to try to dampen the negative impacts of technology on everybody.
And now, Mike, with new space, some people don't know what new space is. So if you can tell a little bit about that. And with the private companies, they have a whole new of possibilities, right?
They do. I mean, space exploration has never been this exciting and this open and available to anybody in the world who's willing to develop those STEM skills. And that's one of our constant messages at KSCIA to the young people is if you'll develop these skills, and we're trying to inspire you to do that and get you excited about developing those skills, you can be involved in space exploration. The barriers are not there that used to be when space exploration was all NASA, which is really the U.S. government. It's a U.S. government entity. There's huge barriers to being involved with that. Only really a small number of people ever get the opportunity to be involved in something like that. I'm fortunate to have been one of those. And then astronauts is an even tinier, tiny group. You know, it's like winning the lottery if you can become a NASA astronaut. So, but those barriers have been removed as it's grown into new space, which is really commercial space. Commercial companies all over the place, hiring people, building facilities. Every time we turn around, there's another billionaire building his own launch vehicle, or another company that wants to build a launch vehicle, their own rockets, and put things into space. Whereas, you know, 20, 30 years ago, even 8, 9, 10 years ago, back when I was involved in military space, you know, the only people who built rockets was the military and NASA with the shuttle, because we're the only ones that had the money to do these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And we launched things into space for our purposes, and shuttle went to space station. But, you know, only these big budget government programs could afford to do this. But now you've got small companies that are building launch vehicles who can launch small payloads into space. Jeff Bezos at Amazon's developing his own stuff through Blue Origin. We all know about SpaceX and Elon Musk, but then there's a number of other companies, and then a lot of other companies that are involved in commercial space technology, you know, back further in the supply chain that are involved in commercial space technologies and things like that. It's really grown, and it's projected to be, you know, a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the world, commercial space. So now is the opportunity, because these companies will pretty much can hire people from anywhere, usually, if you have the right skills and you're willing to work hard.
Mike, thank you so much for the chat. Thank you so much for having the time to talk with us. I think this conversation will inspire some young minds out there. So thank you so much once more.
Thank you, Giovanna. I appreciate it. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.